She had dressed carefully that morning. Not for anyone else. For herself, because Lyra Ashvorne understood, in the quiet way she understood most things, that a mate bond confirmation was the one moment in a wolf's life that deserved her whole self. She had pressed her dress, braided her hair with her mother's ribbon, stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle with her amber eyes forward and her wolf warm and reaching, and a hope she had not let herself fully name sitting right at the center of her chest. She had let herself want this. Just this once. Adrev looked at her across the circle. And in front of every wolf in the pack, the elders, the children, the women who had known her father, he said it. I reject you. 3 words. Public, deliberate, designed. And then the rest of it, the part wolf law did not require, the part he had prepared. Low-ranked, unsuitable, beneath what is required of a bond. Her wolf howled. Not out loud. Inside, a sound that lived in the chest and had nowhere to go and so simply stayed there, reverberating against her ribs like something trying to find a way out of a closed room. Her legs stopped working somewhere between unsuitable and beneath. She did not decide to sit on the ground. She was simply standing. And then not. The packed earth of the ceremonial circle was cold through her dress. The pack was silent. Not the silence of people who did not know what to do. The silence of people who had decided not to. She pressed her hands flat against the earth. Her wolf wounded, present, not gone pressed back against the inside of her chest like something deciding whether it was getting up. She did not hear them arrive. The crowd shifted first, the specific collective movement of many wolves orienting simultaneously towards something behind her, then boots, dark, road-dusted. She looked up. The man crouching in front of her was broad and war-built, dark brown hair unattended from months in the field. But it was his eyes that stopped her dark gold, steady, looking at her face with a completeness that made everything else in the circle go peripheral. Not at the crowd. Not at Adrev. At her. Only her. As if she were the only information in the circle that mattered. She opened her mouth. He reached out 2 fingers, steady, to the side of her throat, and she understood what he was doing half a second before he did it. The mark landed warm. Not the tearing cold of rejection. Warm. The specific warmth of something claiming what it had decided was its own. Her wolf, which had been pressed silent and wounded against her chest, answered. He stood. Unhurried. Absolute. He gathered her from the ground, one arm beneath her knees, one at her back, and turned to face Adrev Kaslan with the specific quality of a man for whom the situation was already resolved and was simply waiting for everyone else to understand it. The crowd had gone completely still. Then recognition moved through it like weather. Kavan Ashvorne, Alpha King of 17 packs, home from 4 months and 17 days of border war. The pack bowed, not individually, together. The involuntary unified deference of wolves who did not think about it, simply did it the way all things move toward gravity. Adrev had gone very still. Kavan looked at him. Dark gold eyes, not angry, not performing. Certain. Now she is mine, he said. His voice did not need volume. And your Luna. One breath of silence. So bow to her. Adrev Kaslan bowed. To the woman he had called unsuitable. In front of everyone. Lyra watched from the circle of Kavan's arms and felt her wolf press warm against the mark at her throat. She did not smile. She did not perform triumph. She simply watched and understood, even through the shock of everything, that this moment would define the rest of Adrev Kaslan's life. Kavan turned and walked. Through the parted crowd, through the bowing pack, through the ceremonial gate and into the palace she had never been inside. He set her on the edge of a bed in a room that smelled like cedar and wood smoke and 4 months of outdoor living. He looked at her face. Are you hurt? Not are you all right, not the question that expected a managed answer. "Are you hurt?" "Yes," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man filing information he intended to address. "Rest," he said. "We speak when you are ready." He left. 2 soldiers appeared outside the door without announcement. She sat in the cedar-scented room and pressed 2 fingers to the mark at her throat. Warm. Still warm. Her wolf turned toward it the way cold things turn toward heat, without deciding to, simply because warmth was there, and warmth had not always been reliable. She did not know his name. She pressed the mark. She breathed. He came home from war and chose her in 30 seconds. Subscribe, this story is just beginning. His name was Kavan Ashvorne. She learned this not from him, but from the palace itself, from the way his soldiers moved through its corridors, from the specific deference in every bowed head, from the Ashvorne crest pressed into the stone above every major doorway. A name she had heard her entire life as something distant and absolute, the way you hear thunder before you understand what storms actually feel like from the inside. The chief maid arrived before dawn. A woman named Dara, sharp-eyed, efficient, the particular composure of someone who had been managing a king's household long enough that very little altered her pace. She set warm food on the table by the window and moved through the room with the quiet authority of someone who belonged in it. "The chamber opposite the Alpha Kings," Dara said. "That is where you are." Lyra looked at the room properly for the first time. She had not looked at it the night before. The night before, she had sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her fingers to the mark at her throat until exhaustion took her somewhere below sleep. Now she saw it, large. Warm stone, the east-facing window throwing morning light in long pale strips across the floor. A writing desk, a wash basin with clean water already poured. A wardrobe that held nothing of hers because she had nothing to put in it. Everything in the room had been arranged for her comfort. Nothing in the room was hers. "He put me here," Lyra said. "He put you where you would be safe and comfortable," Dara said. Those were his exact words. "Not his room. The room opposite." Dara folded a cloth with precise hands. "Close enough to hear if something goes wrong. Far enough to give you room to breathe." Lyra absorbed this. She looked at the food, warm, real, the kind of meal that required a kitchen with care in it. She had not eaten since the morning before, since she had sat at her own small table in her own small room and had a meal that was supposed to precede a mate bond confirmation. That meal sat in her memory now with the specific quality of things that happened just before the world changed. Ordinary, unrepeatable. She ate. Not because hunger had returned, it had not. The rejection bond's physical aftermath had taken her appetite with it. That specific nausea, the law texts described as a severing, which was accurate and entirely insufficient. She ate because sitting in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke and war return while staring at untouched food was a performance of devastation she refused to give anyone, even an empty room. Kavan came to her door on the second evening. No announcement. No knock at first. She heard his boots stop in the corridor, that specific pause of someone deciding something on the other side of a closed door. Then the knock, too, precise. She opened it. He had washed the road from him. Clean clothes, dark, the Ashvorne crest at his collar, the dark brown hair still slightly too long from months in the field, and the eyes dark gold, steady. The complete attending quality that had been the first thing she noticed about him in the ceremonial circle, and that she was beginning to understand, was not an expression he turned on and off, but simply the way he looked at everything he considered worth looking at. The space between them in the doorway held for a moment. "How are you?" he said. Not "are you settling in?" Not "is the room adequate?" Not any of the managed questions that powerful people used to perform concern without requiring a real answer. "Confused," she said. Something in his expression acknowledged this as a reasonable response. "That is fair," he said. May I come in? She stepped back. He came in and stood near the window, not taking the chair, not making himself at home, simply occupying a position that was not the doorway and was not too close. A man who understood the specific geometry of giving someone space without abandoning them in it. Ask what you want to ask, he said. Why? No preamble. The word she had been carrying since the ceremonial circle, since 2 fingers warm at her throat, since the sensation of a mark landing where rejection had been cold. Not the version you would tell the pack, the real version. He was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a man choosing precision over quickness. I came around the eastern ridge, he said. I saw the crowd. I saw the circle. I saw you on the ground. A pause. And I saw your hands pressed flat against the earth. Not collapsed, pressed. The way someone presses down when they are deciding whether to stand on their own. That told you to mark me. That told me what you were, he said. The marking was a separate decision, made in the same 30 seconds. You do not know me. Not yet, he said. I intend to. She pressed the mark at her throat, the gesture she had been making without thinking since the ceremony, the way you press a bruise to confirm it is real. I will not hold you to something you did not ask for, he said. The mark is given. Wolf law recognizes it. What it becomes inside these walls is not decided yet. I am not going anywhere. The way it left her without calculation, without performance, surprised her almost as much as it seemed to settle something in him. That small contained shift in his expression that she was learning to watch for. Not a smile, something preceding one. Good, he said. He moved to the door. Sleep, he said. Eat when Dara brings it. We have time. He left. She stood in the room that smelled faintly of the man across the corridor and pressed her father's braided cord still on her wrist from the morning. The morning that now lived on the other side of everything, and understood that she had just made the first real decision of her new life. 4 words. She had meant all of them. The palace had a texture she had not expected. Not grand in the way that grandness announced itself, no gold-heavy excess, no architecture designed to remind you of your smallness. Simply certain. A place that knew what it was and did not require your acknowledgement of it. The corridors were wide and well lit. The staff moved with the ease of people who had not been made to feel afraid of their own footsteps. She noticed everything. She had always noticed everything. In a life where being overlooked was the weather, observation became the only consistent tool available. She noticed which soldiers came off the border rotation, still carrying their shoulders up around their ears. She noticed that the kitchen garden was slightly ahead of where it should be for the season, and that someone with real knowledge had been tending it. She noticed the specific way the palace wolves moved around Kavan, not the shrinking deference of fear, but the oriented deference of people who trusted the direction they were pointed in. She noticed that the chamber directly across the corridor from hers had boots outside it every morning that had been worn outside the previous day. He did not sleep late. Neither did she, anymore. The pack did not know what to make of her. This was the honest texture of the first week the mark was absolute. The Alpha King's declaration was law, and wolf hierarchy bent immediately and completely to both. She was Luna. Soldiers straightened. The kitchen staff addressed her with careful deference. The pack bowed when she entered rooms. And she was also Lyra Ashvorne. Without family standing, without political weight, not what they had imagined beside a man like Kavan. She heard the conversations that stopped when she turned a corner. The specific considered silence of people who had opinions they were deciding whether it was wise to voice. She let them decide. She found Dara on the 3rd morning. The kitchen requisition schedule, she said. It runs 3 days behind the supply delivery cycle. The kitchen has been working with 4 days stock when 2-day would be available. 7 months of this, from what I can read in the records. Dara set down what she was carrying. You read the supply records. I read everything the archive has open access to. Not defensive. Simply accurate. I would like to address the schedule. This is your household. I am asking your permission, not announcing a change. The pause that followed was the specific pause of a woman reassessing something she had filed too quickly. Dara had been managing this household for 11 years. She had seen Kavan's court, his soldiers, his council. She had her assessments of things, and she revised them rarely. She revised this one. East Archive, she said. 7th hour. I will have the relevant ledgers pulled. On the 5th day, Kavan's beater, a lean, observant man named Reth, who seemed to process information and file it without any visible intermediate step, found the Alpha King at the map table with the border reports. The requisition schedule has been restructured, Reth said. The kitchen has recovered 12 days of compounded stock delay in 3 days of implementation. Kavan did not look up from the reports. Also, Reth said, she has been spending time in the East recovery rooms, the border soldiers. She has no healer's training. She sits, she listens. Derek's wife sent a formal note of thanks this morning because apparently Lyra remembered the name of Derek's youngest daughter from a single mention and asked after her the following day. A pause. Informing, Reth said. Simply informing. I heard you the first time. You have not looked up from the same page in 4 minutes. Kavan looked up. Reth met the dark gold eyes with the specific composure of a man who had been beta long enough to have earned the right to notice things. She is not what they expected, Reth said. No, Kavan said. She is not. He went back to the report. He did not read it. He saw her on the 6th day without intending to. He came around the east corridor heading for the war room and stopped at the sight of her seated on the low bench outside the recovery rooms, in conversation with Vaughan, his oldest border soldier. A man who had spent 6 of the last 8 months at the Northern Front and who had not, in Kavan's knowledge, voluntarily spoken to anyone outside his commanding structure in longer than that. Vaughan was talking. Not in the careful, rationed way of a man reporting. Talking the opened-up way, the kind that required a listener worth talking to. His hands moved. His face was less than it had been. Lyra was not performing listening. She simply was. Entirely present in the specific way that could not be manufactured, that either existed or did not, that made people feel the rarest thing, that the time they were spending on a sentence was worth spending. Vaughan said something. She laughed. Not politely, not the social laugh, the managed one, a real laugh brief, surprised out of her before she had weighed whether to release it. Kavan stood in the corridor. 6 days in his palace. She had not laughed once in his presence. He turned and walked back the way he had come. Reth was at the end of the corridor, carrying nothing, going nowhere in particular with the specific, innocent quality of a man who had absolutely been following his alpha to see what he would do. Not a word, Kavan said. Reth said nothing. He said it with the practiced eloquence of a man who communicated volumes through sustained silence. She was at the eastern wall on the 9th morning. He found her there when he came for his own habit, the dawn reports, the territory below, the first honest light on difficult things. She was 20 feet further along the parapet, golden brown hair loose, amber eyes on the settlement fires still visible in the grey pre-dawn below, a cup of something warm held in both hands. The specific private quality of a person using solitude for something real. He could have gone elsewhere. He did not. He took his usual spot. She turned at his boots on the stone, that moment of mutual acknowledgement, wordless, settling into something that was not quite comfortable yet, and was not quite tense either. The particular quality of 2 people who are figuring out the grammar of each other. I did not know this was a claimed spot, she said. The wall belongs to the territory, he said. Her amber eyes measured him. That is an extremely political answer. It is an accurate one. She looked back at the territory. He opened his reports. 40 minutes passed without words, which was its own kind of conversation. When he finally folded his reports to leave, she was still there, both hands around the cup, watching the settlement fires extinguish one by one as morning overtook them. He came back the next morning. She was already there. The morning after that, already there. They did not discuss this. It became instead one of the small established facts of their days, like the food Dara left outside her chamber at specific hours and the fire in the map room that was always lit before he arrived. A thing that simply was, without requiring the weight of being named. She noticed his hands first. Not romantically, practically, the way a person notices the tools of someone's specific life, broad, capable, marked by months of war in the particular way of hands that have held weapons and reins and the weight of responsibility in equal measure. She noticed them at the map table, at the window, setting down a report with the contained precision of a man for whom every gesture was chosen. She noticed the scar along his left jaw, old and faint, the kind that had been there long enough to become simply part of a face rather than a story attached to it. She nearly asked about it 4 times over the first 2 weeks. Something stopped her. She was not ready to be the kind of person who asked about his scars. Not yet. He noticed her hair. He noticed it the way he noticed everything completely, and then filed. It was always either braided or loose. No arrangements, no pins, no decoration beyond the simple fact of it, which was considerable golden brown and heavy, and the kind of hair that caught whatever light was available and held it. On the wall mornings it was loose. On the morning of the 14th day he stood at his spot with his border reports and read the same paragraph 5 times before acknowledging with the particular honesty he reserved for things he could not argue himself out of that he was not reading it. He noticed she always held her cup with both hands. The specific 2-handed grip of someone for whom warmth was something to be held onto rather than assumed. He noticed this, and did not examine what it told him, because examining it would have required acknowledging what it told him. She noticed the way he moved through the palace. Not with the performed authority of a man who needed rooms to know he was in them, simply with the specific quality of someone for whom the question of authority had been settled long enough ago that it no longer required any of his attention. He gave that attention instead to things: the map, the report, the conversation, the person in front of him. She had been in the presence of powerful men before. She had never been in the presence of one who made power feel like a fact of the landscape rather than a thing being deployed. She noticed he was always already in the room when she arrived anywhere. She stopped attributing this to coincidence around the 12th day. On the 16th day, she came back to her chamber after the morning wall to find Dara inside, folding clothes. Not her clothes. Dara was placing Lyra's things, the few of them. The small collection of a woman who had never been given reason to accumulate into a travelling chest. "Where?" Lyra said. Dara straightened. "The Alpha King has made a request." The specific, careful tone of a woman delivering information whose implications she was not going to narrate. "Which is," Lyra said. "Your belongings," Dara said, "are to be moved into his chamber, henceforth." The room was quiet. "He has noticed," Dara said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had thought about how to say this, "that you are not sleeping, that you eat less than you should. He intends to be certain you are well. This is the method he has decided upon." "Moving me into his room," Lyra said. "Yes. Has he done this before?" 11 years of managing the Ashvorne household looked back at her through Dara's eyes. "No," Dara said. "He has not." She stood in his doorway that evening. He was at the map table, reports, always reports, the unending cartography of 17 territories, and he looked up when she appeared. She did not speak immediately. She looked at the room. It was larger than hers. The same cedar smell, but more of it, deeper, the room having held him for years. 2 chairs by the fire positioned toward each other. Books arranged without decoration along one wall. A window that looked west over the territory rather than east, the setting light rather than the rising. Different from her window. She had not thought about that he would arrange to put her where she caught the morning and kept the evening for himself. "You moved my things," she said. "I asked Dara too. You could have asked me." He set down the report. His full attention arrived the way it always arrived, without announcement, simply present. "You would have said it was unnecessary," he said. "It is unnecessary." "You are not sleeping," he said. "You are eating less than you should. I have been 4 months at war, and I know what a person looks like when they are surviving rather than living. I know it because I have looked like it myself." A pause. "I am not going to manage you. I am going to be nearby. Those are different things." She looked at him across the room. At the dark gold eyes that were not demanding a response, simply stating a fact and leaving her room to receive it. She crossed the threshold. She set her few things beside his on the dresser. She sat in one of the chairs by the fire. After a moment, he picked up his report and returned to the map table. The fire between them burned. The room held them both. Neither of them filled the silence with anything the silence did not require. Her wolf was warm. She turned it over like a stone in her hand, this warmth. This specific quiet of being in the same room as someone whose presence asked nothing of her and understood that she had not felt anything like it in longer than she could cleanly account for. She stayed. The mornings changed first. Before she had woken in the chamber opposite, dressed alone, made her way to the eastern wall with her cup and her thoughts and the specific private ritual of a woman giving herself the first hour before the day required her for anything. Now she woke in his room, in the specific ambient warmth of a space that held another person's breathing, and found that the first hour still belonged to her, but that belonging to her had a different texture in it. Less alone, not less private. The distinction mattered to her more than she expected. He was always awake before her. She discovered this on the 3rd morning she had assumed he rose after her, had found him already at the eastern wall as a function of his own early habit. The truth was, he was awake before the sun, and simply quiet about it. He read in the low pre-dawn light at the map table. He did not move until he heard her. He did not acknowledge that he had been listening for her. She did not acknowledge that she had noticed. These were the specific courtesies of 2 people learning each other in a space with no instruction manual. She began eating. Not dramatically, not the transformation of appetite, not a sudden recovery from the rejection bond's physical aftermath. Gradually, the way appetite returns when the body decides the emergency is over and it is safe to need things again. The food that appeared on the table in the mornings was always warm and always specific. She had mentioned once, without thinking, that she found sweetened grain too heavy in the morning. The next morning it was not there. The morning after that, not there. The morning after that, not there. And in its place something lighter and warm and exactly right. She had not mentioned this again. He had not acknowledged it. But she watched him read his reports at the map table on the 7th morning in his room and understood that this was how he operated, not with the performance of care, but with its practice, quietly, specifically, with the precision of a man who paid attention and then applied what he learned without requiring to be thanked for the paying. "The scar," she said. He looked up. "Along your jaw. I have almost asked about it 6 times. Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprised, something more like acknowledged. 7 years ago, he said. Northern border conflict. Different threat than the current one. I was moving faster than my guard and slower than the blade. Does it still hurt? He touched it, the brief, unconscious gesture of someone who had forgotten it was there until someone else remembered it. When it rains, he said. Sometimes. She nodded. Went back to the law text she had been reading. The room continued its mourning around them, but something in it had opened the specific quality of a question asked and answered honestly, a door tried and found unlocked. She felt him return to his reports and knew, without looking up, that the quality of his attention had changed, that he was thinking about the question the way she had thought about asking it. She turned a page. He turned a page. Outside the west window, the territory moved from grey to gold. She was stealing glances by the second week in his room, and she knew it. At breakfast, the specific line of his jaw in the morning light, the way he held his cup with one hand where she held hers with two, the dark brown hair that was growing too long again from the months away, and that he showed no particular urgency about addressing. She looked and then looked at her food, and then looked again, in the way of someone who has told themselves they are not doing a thing, and is doing the thing. He was doing it too. She caught him twice. Once in the evening by the fire, she had looked up from her reading and found him not reading, that found him looking at her with the dark gold eyes that were doing something quieter than the complete attending quality she was used to from him. Something private. He shifted his gaze back to his report with a composure so precise it was almost its own admission. The second time was at the eastern wall. She had been watching the territory and felt the specific weight of being watched, and turned to find him not looking at the reports in his hand but at her. At her hair specifically. The morning had been cold. She had left it loose as insulation, and the wind was doing something with it. He looked at the report the moment she turned. But the moment before the quality of what had been in his expression before the governance came back, she held that carefully. The way you hold something you are not sure is fragile. The reports, she said. Yes, he said, very levelly. You have been reading the same one for 3 mornings. A pause. The border situation is complex, he said. She turned back to the territory. But the corner of her mouth just barely moved. She had understood he would be gone until late. Reth had sent word a border matter in the eastern tower, the kind that ran until it was finished rather than until the hour suggested stopping. She had the room to herself. She had filled the large stone bath with the methodical pleasure of someone doing something specifically because it was theirs to do, heated by the fire, with no one to account to for the time spent in it. She was not thinking about him. She was thinking about the pack welfare reports she had been reading, about a distribution inefficiency in the northern settlements that she had not yet found the right moment to raise. She was thinking about the braided cord on her wrist and the morning she had worn it into the ceremonial circle. She was letting the water draw some of the weight out of her, the weight she had been carrying since that morning, which had reduced over the weeks in this palace, but had not entirely gone, and perhaps never would entirely go. The door opened. She heard it. She heard the pause that followed that specific held quality of a man whose body had stopped mid-motion because the situation was not what he had expected, and whose mind had not yet finished processing what to do with that. Kavan. His name in her voice in that register low, not frightened, simply present, was the thing that moved him. Not away. He crossed to the edge of the bath and crouched. Close. The dark gold eyes at her level, which was where they had been in the ceremonial circle, and which was where they were now, a man who met things at their level, rather than standing over them. The governance of his expression was thinner than she had ever seen it. Not gone, thinner, the specific quality of something that was still there, but had less of the structural support it usually ran on. I should leave, he said. Yes, she said. Neither of them moved. The fire was low. The room was warm. Outside the west window, the territory was fully dark, the settlements showing their evening fires like scattered amber below. Tell me to go, he said. She looked at him. At the scar along his jaw, that hurt when it rained. At the dark brown hair that was too long and that she had been not touching for 3 weeks with the specific effort of someone maintaining a decision they kept reconsidering. At the hands that moved precisely when he spoke and that had carried her from the ceremonial circle with the specific gentleness of someone handling something they had decided mattered. She looked at him and she did not tell him to go. She would not, afterward, try to translate it into the borrowed language of wolf lore or love stories, or any framework built by people who had not been in this room on this night. What she would keep was this: the specific quality of being handled by someone for whom the handling was entirely about her. The way he touched her face first, not her body, her face, as if the person in it was what required acknowledgement before anything else. The fire going out, and neither of them moving to address it. The cedar smell of the room becoming indistinguishable from the warmth of him, and then indistinguishable from the warmth of what they were doing, all of it becoming the same warmth. All of it becoming simply the room, the dark, the two of them in it. She would keep the sound of her name in his voice with nothing governing it. She would keep that she was not afraid. Not once, not for a single moment, not in any register she could locate in herself. She woke before him, lay in the cedar dark, and took inventory, the practiced habit of a woman who had always checked herself before the day could, and found the inventory different from what it had been for weeks. The wound of the rejection bond was still there, the specific severing that would need time she had not yet had, but around it, and beneath it, and in the spaces between something else. Something that had been building in increments she had not named as building, that had arrived last night as something named, that she was lying in now in the dark, with her wolf warm and present, and no longer pressing against a mark as if confirming something fragile. The mark felt settled. It had not felt settled until this morning. She turned her head. He was beside her, the light sleep of a dominant wolf, already oriented even in sleep, awareness present at low frequency beneath the rest. The scar along his jaw caught the edge of pre-dawn light through the curtain's edge. His breathing was even and slow. She had time to look at him. She took it. The dark brown hair against the pillow, the specific architecture of a face that was severe in structure and not severe in expression, at least not now, not in sleep, not in this room. The broad line of his shoulder. She had been living in proximity to this man for weeks and had been maintaining, with considerable discipline, the specific curated distance of someone who was not sure how much closeness was hers to take. She looked at him now without curating anything. He opened his eyes, found her immediately already oriented, already knowing exactly where everything was in the room and what it was. He looked at her for a moment in the early quiet. "Good morning," she said. The expression that moved across his face was the one she had been catching fragments of since the ceremonial circle, the one beneath the precision, the one that the governance usually arrived in time to cover. She had seen pieces of it. A corner of the mouth, the slight softening around the eyes, a quality in the stillness. She saw it whole now, unhurried, unguarded, entirely real. "Yes," he said, "it is." Love, when it was Kavan's, looked like morning reports on her side of the map table. Not the classified border matters, the territorial ones, the pack welfare ones, the supply chain ones. The 15 categories of administrative reality that she had been circling, with the instincts of someone who knew how these things worked and had never been given formal access to work on them. He left them without announcement or instruction, the stack appearing before she woke on the mornings after their first night, and continuing every morning after. Not a test, not an assignment. A statement, in the language of a man who communicated through action rather than declaration. "You are Luna. Luna means something real here." She read them. She made notes. She left the notes where he would find them. He read them. He implemented what held and sent back questions on what needed more development, and the questions were precise and specific, and written in a hand that was angular and spare, and that she had memorized by the third week, the way you memorize the handwriting of someone whose words you find yourself looking for. She found her standing in the pack the way real standing is found, not through ceremony or declaration, but through the accumulated proof of specific, small, true things. The soldiers from the border campaign sought her out in the East Recovery Corridor with a regularity that had stopped being coincidental around the second week. She had a way of sitting with difficulty, not at it, not performing comfort, simply sitting beside it with a patience that made people feel less alone in whatever they were carrying. Vaughan had not spoken voluntarily to non-command personnel in 8 months before she sat beside him on the recovery bench. He spoke to her twice a week now. He had started eating more. The kitchen staff had begun preparing her morning preference without being asked a thing Kavan noticed one morning at breakfast without saying anything, and that Reth noticed him notice, and that neither of them mentioned, and that sat in the space between them with the pleasant weight of something confirmed. The outer district wolves, the supply coordinators, the archive staff who found her there before 7th hour more mornings than not, reading with the concentration of someone for whom information was not a luxury, but a tool she had always known how to use and had simply never been given full access to. She did all of it without requiring the work to be credited in order for the work to be real. The pack credited it anyway. Not because she asked them to, because things that are real become visible when the environment is finally capable of seeing them. She was at the map table on the 42nd day when Adrev was announced. She had known he would come eventually. A territorial matter in the eastern districts, his standing there made him the legitimate representative. The administrative structure left him no grounds to send someone else. She had read the meeting request when Kavan left it on the table with the others, had set it down, had picked up the Southern District welfare reports instead, and spent 4 days making the territorial notes that Kavan had asked for and that she had understood as a different kind of request than the administrative one. Your assessment, not mine. She had given it. She was reviewing her own notes when Adrev walked in. She did not look up immediately. She finished the line she was reading. Then she looked up. Adrev Kaslan. High-born, cold. The specific compressed quality of a man who had been bowing to a woman he had publicly called unsuitable for 42 days and had not yet located a framework for what that said about the quality of his assessment. He looked different from the ceremonial circle. She tried to name it, found smaller, not physically, the particular reduction that happens to a man when the world fails to confirm the story he has been telling himself about his own judgment. Adrev, she said. Luna. The title cost him. She watched it cost him and felt not satisfaction. Something more honest than satisfaction. The specific recognition of a person living inside consequences they had built and could not exit. Sit down, she said. The Eastern grazing allocation. I have questions, and you have standing there. He sat. She opened the report. For an hour she asked precise questions and received precise answers and demonstrated, without announcing the demonstration, that she had read the Eastern District records thoroughly enough to ask questions that a superficial reading would not have produced. He answered with the contained competency of someone who was good at his work, regardless of his failures as a person. She acknowledged good answers as good answers without performing graciousness about it. At the end he stood, looked at her across the table with the expression of a man who had arrived expecting one thing and received something his categories had not prepared him for. She met his gaze without heat, without coldness. Simply steady. The amber eyes that had been on the ground in the ceremonial circle, looking at him now from across a table in the Alpha King's palace, and finding him neither more nor less than what he was. My notes will be with the Alpha King by evening, she said. He left. She sat at the map table in the quiet after the door closed. She pressed 2 fingers to the mark at her throat, the gesture she still made, less desperately than before, more like checking on something she knew was there and wanted to confirm. Still warm. Always warm. She had not needed to wound him, had not needed to stand in his ceremonial circle and deliver prepared cruelties while a crowd listened. She had sat across from him and been entirely herself, the thing that this ground, this palace, this man across the corridor and now across the bed had finally given her room to be. That was the thing Adrev had not been able to calculate when he looked at her in the ceremonial circle and saw a low-ranked wolf. You could not calculate for what someone became when someone else finally looked at them properly. Kavan found her there an hour later. He stopped when he saw the rearranged maps. She had reorganized the southern allocation while she waited, the 3 redundancies she had identified now marked clearly in the margins of the reports. He read them without sitting down. He read them twice. "These are correct," he said. "I know." He looked at her, at the mark at her throat, at the woman who had been on the ground in the ceremonial circle 42 days ago and who was sitting at his map table with the territorial reports of 17 packs open in front of her and notes in the margins that were better than what his last 3 council reviews had produced. "Adrev," he said. "He came. We spoke. How was it?" She considered. "Clarifying," she said. "I think for both of us." He moved to the table. He sat across from her, not at the head of it, across from her, and picked up her notes and read them again with the complete attention of a man for whom reading something properly meant reading it twice. "Lyra," he said. "Yes." "Are you well? Not the managed version. Not the version that expected a managed answer. Actually." She looked at him, at the dark gold eyes, at the scar that hurt when it rained, at the man who had crouched in ceremonial circle dirt to meet her at her level and who had been meeting her at her level in every room, in every hour, ever since. "Yes," she said. "Actually." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he set down the notes and pulled the Southern District map toward him and said, "Walk me through the 3rd redundancy. I want to understand your reasoning." She leaned forward. She walked him through it. Outside the west window, the territory moved into evening. The settlement fires came up one by one in the blue dark below. Reth appeared in the doorway, saw them at the map table, and withdrew without announcing himself. He would tell the council in the morning that the Alpha King and the Luna had spent 4 hours on the Southern District allocation and that the notes produced in those 4 hours were the most precise territorial analysis the 17 packs had received in 11 years. He would tell them this with the specific, composed tone of a man who was informing. Simply informing. Adrev Kaslan rode east through the territory as the evening came down. He had bowed at the palace gate when he left. He would bow every time, every formal occasion, every territorial function, every administrative meeting that his Eastern District standing required him to attend. He would bow to Lyra Ashvorne, whom he had called unsuitable in public, whom he had left on the ground in the ceremonial circle in front of their entire pack, and the bowing would be the specific daily weight of a calculation made badly. He had looked at her and seen rank. Kavan Ashvorne had looked at her and seen everything rank, could not measure the hands pressed flat against the earth, the amber eyes that held without collapsing, the particular quality of someone who was deciding rather than surrendering. He had seen it in 30 seconds. He had marked her. He had moved her into his palace, into his room, into the 17 territories of his authority and his care. He had loved her. Not with the performed grand love of ceremony and declaration, with the specific daily love of a man who left reports on her side of the table and arranged breakfast precisely, and asked, "Are you well in the register?" that meant he actually needed to know. She had loved him back in the way she did everything completely, practically, without requiring it to be named before it was real. The pack saw it. The 17 territories felt it. Adrev Kaslan bowed to it every time. The thing about a rejected bond is that it breaks the wrong person, only temporarily. She was on the ground. She pressed her hands flat against the earth. She was deciding. He saw the deciding, before he saw anything else. That was the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. Lyra Ashvorne, on the ground, deciding, not surrendered. Kavan Ashvorne, 30 seconds, one decision, a lifetime of meaning it. Adrev bowed, every time, to the woman he called unsuitable, in front of everyone, as his alpha instructed. Some calculations cost everything. This one did. If this story held you, you know where you belong. Subscribe. New stories every week.